For decades, we've heard politicians and the media lambast public schools as failing and broken and denounce the corrupt teachers' unions for protecting lazy and bad teachers. If you look at the statistics, that appears to be the
Ironically, at the same time as we literally profess that the police unions are the same thing, but then those same people who lambast teachers unions don't do the same or think like it's even higher of a problem in police unions. Okay.
case. You see a story of declining test scores and mediocre student performance. In 2018, the United States performed worse than Lithuania and Vietnam in mathematics on international testing. The antidote prescribed by the establishment experts is simple: privatization and deregulation. But what if they're wrong? What if the root causes plaguing our public schools are instead poverty, hypersegregation, and chronic disinvestment? What if we examine public schools not as isolated institutions, but within a larger political and economic context that deprives children, families, and their communities of basic livelihoods? In the late 1980s, renowned writer Jonathan Kozol barnstormed the country for 2 years, visiting and documenting his observations in schools in urban and suburban neighborhoods. Reporting from East St. Louis, he noted in his harrowing book Savage Inequalities that schools were overcrowded. Children did not have sufficient books, paper, computers, and other resources. Science labs were outdated by a half century. And improper heating made some classrooms freeze and others boil, sometimes reaching 100 degrees. As Kozol put it, one searches for some way to understand why a society as rich and frequently as generous as ours would leave these children in their penury and squalor for so long. And with so
Because we do not give a shit about the children in there. That's specifically why hey, you went to college and you became a liberal. Like, because their view of schools leads to some form of hard work or hard labor. It's all the personal onus. You see how that personal responsibility leaks into systems? I think I said this earlier in another piece, how that bloody blending creates a support failure of literally anything or anyone who dares challenge it, who dares sit in front and be like, this is wrong. Like,
so little public indignation. Contrary to popular belief, more than a quarter century later, public schools across the United States remain starved of resources. That's because the U.S. is unique in how it funds schools. School funding is determined largely by local property taxes, meaning that wealthy, largely white children are educated in gleaming palaces, while poor, Black, Latino, and Indigenous children are often confined to crumbling schools with crowded classrooms, zero-tolerance discipline, poorly paid teachers and staff, and lack of access to school nurses, librarians, and social workers. Consider a tale of two school systems. In rich, predominantly white Lower Merion, a suburb of Philadelphia, schools spend more than $26,000 per student.
and that's what I used to say. I think I said this earlier in Why Being Poor Sucks Part 2, which is dropping very soon. This is the problem with when you think about just what school is supposed to offer. For poor people, it becomes almost a daycare sense. The entitlement does also roll in with that. You have to expect something of your school, and when that comes at a disadvantage, or when that comes at a point that is not to trying to find a good word here. When you come to a point where like you idolize what other schools had, like the big campus, the ball games, the football games, this and that, it's like the funding for kids to even be enrolled in something like that might not look as promising. So the idea of a Division I scout coming to see that football game in Harlem is a lot lower than them going to, Lower Merion School or some beautiful high school in New Jersey that like is the almost the college experience, in our little rap point. And then the kids go home in their cars. They don't take public transportation. They don't have those interactions every single day that urban kids have. So that shapes your identity towards who you get attracted to, what you like, the forms of communication that you're able to eke out, popular culture, things that happen in a large school where the community is involved generally carry with that the community inside itself. So in the higher priced places, it might be about how like Deborah's mom got too drunk and fell in the pool, and everybody in the town kind of heard about that and it was funny. Or Joni loves Shachi, that type of thing. You get to have that high school esque picture in your head, and because of media and the consistency in television propaganda and whatnot, you assimilate those experiences with that. So now it is like the Long Beach, Bayside High, Saved by the Bell environment. While for some kids, you're literally living in The Wire. Like the difference is so stark that you even start to, and I shouldn't say start to, this is a lie. It is this way, where you see poor neighborhoods as that gloomy war torn. There is no happiness like there is with the nice trees and the cars driving by. And hey, Jimmy, you coming to the bake sale later? There's, yo, my man just got shot, and like everybody's kind of in mourning in the city right now.
And just a few miles away, the diverse Philadelphia schools, which serve predominantly poor and working class children, spend less than $15,000 per student. This is a nationwide phenomenon. In 2016, majority minority school districts received $23 billion less in funding than majority white districts, despite serving the same number of students. This is apartheid-style education. Instead of addressing these inequities, the federal government has doubled down on a market-based approach. Private foundations, think tanks, and both Democratic and Republican officials have fought for a corporate makeover of the public education system. They champion austerity measures, high-stakes standardized testing, school closures, expansion of no-excuses charter schools, a weakening of teachers' unions, and stiff disciplinary methods. This has been the major approach of education reform for the last 2 decades. In 2001, the No Child Left Behind Act, signed into law by President George Bush, with bipartisan approval, imposed stringent testing measures for elementary and middle school students. Those schools that didn't make adequate annual progress risked being labeled as a failing school, having all or parts of its staff fired, shut down, converted into a charter school, taken over by the state, or privatized. Then there was the Race to the Top program, a $4 billion grant competition under the Obama administration. In order to qualify for federal education funding, states were required to adopt an ensemble of policies in their schools. Performance-based teacher evaluations.
Hey, welcome to the stream.
More standardized tests, more charter schools, and more interventions in failing schools, closures, privatizations, and takeovers.
I guess I could do a whole thing on this, and I don't want to, but I mean it's my channel. I could do whatever the hell I want. I'm gonna take that sentence and kind of gravitate it down towards like my life. So just recently, as you guys know, or you don't know, but like people around me in my life know, I wanted to start a Nerf sports league because I was realizing that kids, and I wanted to start a middle school esports league. I was realizing that the way that we teach kids, the incentives that we give them don't play out in the real world. Like education, when you're watching literal 13, 14, 15, 16-year-olds become millionaires through Fortnite, like the attention span of children is different now. They are able to consume at a rapid pace, even though they're not consuming it in a way that may be healthy or meaningful or productive in the in the capitalistic sense. You know what I'm talking about. Kids enjoy themselves through those methods and means. So when you work around poor neighborhoods where kids are trying to consistently find an escape from whatever bad situation, whatever poor situation, whatever unhealthy situation that they're put around as when they're growing up, they will attach to things that make life a little bit better. When we were in the 90s, the 80s, the 90s, maybe a little bit even into the 10s, maybe around the time I was in school, smartphones and the like, and like Game Boy Advances and stuff, those were mainstream items, but those weren't gotten by everybody. So it didn't dominate the culture to the point where, you'd want to be on it all the time. There was no feed to keep us like entertained there. We could wait 4 hours and be like, I can't wait to go home and play Mega Man Battle Network 3. What does that have to do with anything? Hold on. As I noticed when I started those leagues, the kids generally gravitated towards them, and from there, I could make like education requirements. If you want to participate in this, you need a certain level of grade. From that, literally alone, kids would come to me and say, I really want to be a part of this, but I'm not good at school. I'm not good at this. I'm not good at that. And they would seek out resources because something that they liked was tangentially held to something that they had issues with. They were willing to try to work on the issues to get the reward. There really isn't an incentive right now for kids to feel like there is a grand reward for being in school when there are other options that can be opened up to them that they don't honestly need an education. They can learn on the job. A lot of these jobs that can be done can be learned on the job. That's why I don't like when people say, "Oh, McDonald's is a place for like high school kids or whatever." What do you think that job entails? This goes into a whole thing about jobs, whatever. So to yet again pull it back, what I also noticed when I started those leagues is how desperately it became about numbers, like numbers and attendance and enrollment and grades. It was almost like we need these children to just achieve this, and we don't want to do anything to actually nurture a community that can get to that point. We don't want to be and this is the irony because that was the name of the program I worked in. We weren't a beacon for a community to rally around and say, all right, let's get the funding up. Let's do this. Let's do that. Let's complain to our school board members. We've got great teachers. There was no drive. The teachers didn't have the drive because who were they teaching? And I'm sad to say, especially in the schools that I was working in, a lot of teachers did not have that drive to want to push a little bit forward. Now, this, of course, goes into the idea of teacher salaries, workload, curriculums, whatever. We're not saying it's the teacher's fault. Like, it's not my fault. Like, I just found an avenue that helped me in the classroom and helped boost the community of the school morale. We don't get that because funding exists. There are goals that have to be met. And when these goals aren't met, schools shut down. So then it becomes a race to how easy can we make things so kids get higher grades and we don't lose our jobs, or the school doesn't close down or isn't given a failing grade, versus how hard can we make it before the curve turns negative and we don't have the resources to be able to teach certain things. Like, you want STEM in these classes, but like, we need money to be able to buy that stuff. And teachers are usually the ones that have to shell that out. So if I'm a teacher, a portion of my salary goes back into the classroom. I'm not reimbursed for that. The state doesn't reimburse me for that. Like, I think you get like a $250 teacher allowance or whatever to do stuff. Like, it's a consistent combination of everything wrong with the system and how we even apply funding to schools that breaks down why certain schools don't give you what you want. There just isn't enough resources. I can't hire a fourth teacher to teach about social studies in a very more specific way that well rounds their education, because we're literally sticking 40 kids in a class. We split that up. We got to split up. We got to find another room. We got to find another this. We got to find this, that, and the other. We got to change up the schedule. We need things to work in a block function so kids can just go from place to place. They don't get that nurturing because there just isn't enough money to afford enough time. Plus, we have to yet again worry about the attendance, the numbers, the grades. So all of that you start to realize that, like, not only could we say that education could save a lot of Black lives, a lot of brown lives, a lot of Latino, like we could go into the minority complex and how education could be a vehicle for us to finally explore what we want in society. But at the same time, you can't have that conversation, because what ends up happening is that you realize that the people that argue against it, the people who are like, oh, the teachers are teaching critical race theory and Marxism and liberal college, all that, are also the people who were taught under the same system. Their education systems failed them because their parents didn't have that same education system that failed them. See, like, it keeps failing over and over. But now with the rise of the internet, there's a secondary education. There are places where you can check facts of what your teachers are talking about. There's a whole level and institute of things that we can actually afford to look at and see. And for the sake of argument, TikTok, like you can scroll and see different information, and like people actually spreading good words about different cultures and things you might not have even been aware of, which challenges what schools are teaching. But since schools have to reach the quotas and have to get the grades up, they can't explore and compound on those subjects that children might like. So the divide turns into a grate, which turns into two tectonic plates, creating an earthquake. As things break apart, it only gets worse because there is nothing that can bring them together under that system. You cannot take higher education. Yes, it is being recorded. You cannot take the two simultaneous sides and push them together without fixing the funding and resources that each school gets. To which then you end up with things like affirmative action, moral righteous ground for black people. We clearly have to help out the poor people who just happen to be black or brown or minority stuck in the urban areas. We could go into wealth inequality. You see how just education, if you look at public versus private schools, charter schools, this, that, and the other, where property taxes are high, just that one aspect of the entire mainframe of society could shape every single conflict you've ever had. But we take it for granted because we, as a society, still think about school the way it used to be. Now, you might say, well, how's that possible? How's that? That can't be right. We have social services, we've got government, we've got the job sector, we've got the economic sector, we've got the price of this, we've got big tech, we've got the industries, we've got movies. All of that, all of our ideology stem down from what common core beliefs we teach. That's why, and oh God, I hate that I just did that as a pun that led into a point, but that's what common core was supposed to be. An excelling program moving forward the way we educate, so that way we can get children to be at the same rate of education as like Japan, for instance, high-ranking education. But we didn't implement the infrastructure, we just implemented the plan. And again, this goes back to what I said at the beginning of this stream. I see you, brother. Oh, that's why you were asking if it was being recorded, because you want to hear the rest of it later. I just picked up on that. I just got that. Anyway, yeah, I'll link you. See ya. Yeah, no, and what becomes of that is this very strong-holded, this very clapping you, boom. This very stark contrast between why we think education is important and how we implement it. Because as I said before in an earlier segment with the CDC, we love to tell teachers, we love to tell the education department what to do, but we never tell them how to do it. So you want that same standard that's in another country, but you won't build the infrastructure to get the availability of that standard reached to every kid. And until we do that, we're always going to have a stark difference in how kids grow up. Therefore, we need to have better education standards on how we view what we're teaching and what we could be allowed to teach. Because we can go through the basics in math, science, English, we could do that. But if we're not applying real-world applicable, if we're not applying the real-world applications of these skills, then just like people who used to be stupid good at math, they lost it because there's nothing math attendable here. I could learn about how to put that together, and I honestly may not have to know about like conductors and a little bit of physics, but like about that, I could just look that up on YouTube. So what are we teaching here? Sorry, that was a long tangent. My bad.
Under the logic of
Pause,
the school
Champ
reformers,
Andy.
superintendents get called CEOs. Schools in
Oh, it
poor
went up to
communities,
4K.
especially
Ooh, the
Black,
auto was
Latino,
4K. Ooh.
and Indigenous ones, are ranked, sanctioned, shut down, and turned over to private management based on student test scores. Teachers are fired and punished based on student performance, and their ratings are sometimes published in newspapers. Segregated charter schools are opened to create an educational free market to promote competition with public schools. In New York City alone, more than 100,000 students, or 1 in 10 in the city, were homeless. About 34,000 of them came to school from homeless shelters. Millions more children across the US, about 15% of all children, live in poverty. It is one of the highest rates in the industrialized world. That rate is far above the 4% figure in Scandinavian countries. Former Secretary of Education Arne Duncan once said that it is opportunity, not poverty, that shapes children's destiny. But we know the effects of poverty on children: malnutrition, stunted development, mental illness, and low academic achievement. If the corporate school reformers were really committed to making life better for the poorest children in our country, they would stop making such asinine comments and declare, as educator Kenzo Shibata once said, poverty shouldn't be, period. It's not actually that hard to imagine what is necessary to transform the lives of the most vulnerable. It doesn't require more charter schools or more standardized testing. Rather, in line with other countries, we could guarantee an unconditional sum of $250 a month per child per family to pay for diapers, food, clothing, and other child care costs. This measure alone would cut the child poverty rate by 40% and slash deep poverty in half. It would be the most substantive expansion of the social safety net for children in the modern history of the United States. If we are to guarantee an equitable public education worthy of the dignity of all children, there is no better place to begin than waging an assault on the moral scandal of child poverty in the wealthiest nation in the history of the world.
And when people say the wealthiest nation in the world, I always think back, like, if we got all this money, who the hell has it? And why are so many people without?
I'm Nikhil Goyal, sociologist and PhD candidate at the University of Cambridge for the Gravel Institute.
Bars, brother. Bars, brother. I think that's a good place to stop. Yeah, that's fucked. We're fucked. Like, just one segment alone, literally. Like, bro, an extra $250 a month, like, per child. Oh, but we'll give it to them on their tax credits. Like, okay, how much money do we make though?